Lewis Hamilton has just been re-signed by Mercedes to return to what was once his home. Will he finish the season with Ferrari? Will he join Mercedes immediately or wait until next season? Want to find out? Stay until the end of the video. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Lewis Hamilton has once again captured the world's attention, but this time, not with a blistering pole lap or a daring overtake. This time, it's with words. In a move that is being described by fans, pundits, and insiders as both shocking and deeply symbolic, the 8-time Formula One world champion has announced his official return to Mercedes for the 2026 and 2027 seasons, confirming months of swirling speculation and shattering what little illusion remained about his turbulent time at Scuderia Ferrari. But this announcement was not delivered through a glossy press release or polished interview. Instead, it came straight from Hamilton himself, raw, heartfelt, and intensely personal, via his verified Instagram account. And within minutes, the racing world was set ablaze. The post began with a 6-word sentence that carried the weight of years of frustration, hope, pride, and pain. Home is where the respect is. I'm coming back. No hashtags. No emojis. No filters. Just clarity, confidence, and closure. It wasn't just a statement, it was a thunderclap. It spoke volumes to those who had watched his Ferrari tenure unfold with confusion, concern, and curiosity. And for those inside the Ferrari paddock who had dismissed whispers of unrest, the message hit like a freight train. Hamilton wasn't just announcing a return, he was reclaiming his voice. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. What followed that opening salvo was not a passive thank you or a carefully managed goodbye. It was a candid, detailed, emotionally devastating narrative that pulled back the curtain on the final, agonizing chapter of his time in red. He spoke of feeling like a stranger in a place that should have been a second home, of offering his experience, his passion, and his loyalty, only to be met with resistance, disregard, and at times, what he described as deliberate exclusion. I walked into that garage every day, he wrote, believing we were building something together. But more and more, it felt like I was the only one carrying bricks. According to Hamilton, the challenges at Ferrari went far beyond on-track performance or strategic misfires. This was personal. He described an environment that never truly embraced him, not as a competitor, not as a leader, and certainly not as a person. Despite his monumental achievements, despite his global stature, despite the immense pressure he willingly shouldered to bring Ferrari back to championship glory, he said he often felt like a placeholder in someone else's narrative. At some point, it stopped being about racing, he continued. It became about politics, positioning, and protecting certain interests. Insiders have corroborated much of what Hamilton hinted at in his post. Multiple sources close to the Ferrari garage have confirmed that over the past year, there were escalating tensions between Hamilton and team principal Frédéric Vasseur. What began as subtle disagreements about race strategy and technical direction reportedly evolved into full-blown clashes behind closed doors. These meetings, once collaborative, became confrontational. Hamilton, known for his detailed feedback and obsessive attention to car setup, began to feel that his insights were not only ignored but actively dismissed. Sources say that things took a darker turn when key personnel within the team began to split into factions, those who aligned with Leclerc, and those who remained neutral. Hamilton allegedly began noticing differences in how information was shared, how decisions were communicated, and how trust was distributed. In his post, he did not name Leclerc directly, but the message was unmistakable. "I've raced alongside great teammates," Hamilton wrote. "Men who pushed me, challenged me, and respected the fight. This wasn't that." While the relationship between Hamilton and Leclerc was always presented to the media as professional, those on the inside describe an increasingly cold and distant dynamic. In the early months of their partnership, there were signs of mutual admiration, but as the season progressed, and as key strategy calls appeared to lean in Leclerc's favor, the atmosphere in the garage began to change. Hamilton felt he was being systematically pushed to the side. Strategy debriefs became one-sided. Setup preferences were overridden. Tire choices favored the other car. And yet, nothing was said publicly, until now. The emotional core of Hamilton's post came when he described the psychological toll of the final months. He called it the most emotionally isolating chapter of my career. He wrote of long nights in hotel rooms questioning his purpose, of race weekends where the joy had been replaced by anxiety, and of moments where he looked around the garage and saw not teammates, but walls. "There's nothing more painful," he wrote, then giving everything to something, and realizing it was never going to be enough, not because of your performance, but because of the space you were never allowed to fill. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Fans have erupted in support, flooding social media with messages of solidarity and respect. Fellow drivers, though silent publicly, have reportedly reached out privately, offering encouragement and empathy. At the same time, the motorsport media has gone into overdrive, analyzing every word, every line, every possible implication of Hamilton's statement. Ferrari, for their part, has yet to issue an official response, though team sources claim they were not given advance notice of the post. Internally, the team is said to be in crisis containment mode, with some staff blindsided and others unsurprised. Meanwhile, at Mercedes headquarters, the mood is said to be one of quiet vindication. Toto Wolff, Hamilton's longtime ally and former team boss, has not commented publicly, but sources close to the Silver Arrows say the deal has been in the works for several months, finalized just before the summer break. Hamilton's return marks a seismic shift for the 2026 grid, coinciding with the arrival of new engine regulations and a potential reshuffling of the competitive order. Mercedes has bet on familiarity, leadership, and the hunger of a driver with unfinished business. Hamilton, in his post, made it clear that his decision wasn't just about racing, it was about respect, belonging, and control over his own story. "I'm not coming back to relive the past," he wrote. "I'm returning to finish what I started. I want to compete where my voice matters. I want to win with people who see me, not just my record." Those words struck a chord deeper than any podium ever could. For many fans, they reflected not just a career choice, but a personal stand. The consequences of this announcement are already rippling across the sport. Sponsorship deals, driver contracts, and team strategies are being reassessed in light of the shockwave. Paddock insiders are already speculating on what this means for Leclerc's future, for Ferrari's stability, and for the rest of the driver market. One senior executive from a rival team reportedly told a journalist, "This isn't just a driver switch. This is a statement. Everyone's watching." And so, Hamilton's comeback is more than just a return to familiar colors. It is a revival, a reset, a reclamation of identity after a chapter that nearly broke him. As the sport braces for the new era in 2026, the presence of Lewis Hamilton back in silver will serve as a reminder that greatness doesn't just fade when it's misused, it waits, regathers, and rises. With every word he wrote, Hamilton made one thing unmistakably clear: he's not finished. Not even close. And this time, he's not just driving for glory. He's driving for himself. Let me know if you'd like to continue with reactions from fans, media, or rival teams like Red Bull or Aston Martin. The tension that had been quietly building behind the scenes at Ferrari finally erupted in a moment that those present described as more revealing than any on-track battle. It didn't happen during a wheel-to-wheel fight or a dramatic overtaking maneuver. It unfolded in the controlled, clinical setting of the Ferrari motorhome, just after the Austrian Grand Prix. Inside a debrief room filled with engineers, strategists, technical directors, and performance analysts, the atmosphere was supposed to be one of analysis and collaboration. Instead, it turned into a turning point. According to multiple insiders, team principal Frédéric Vasseur broke from his typically measured tone and directly addressed Lewis Hamilton in front of the entire engineering team. "You're not adapting fast enough," he allegedly said. "Charles is the reference here." That single statement, delivered without warning, without empathy, landed like a gut punch in the center of the room. The words echoed. Mechanics shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Data analysts froze mid-typing. The silence that followed was sharper than the comment itself. For Lewis Hamilton, a man whose name is synonymous with excellence, consistency, and championship pedigree, being publicly diminished wasn't just disrespectful, it was insulting. His pride, forged through decades of relentless work, 7 official world titles, and countless comebacks, was suddenly questioned in front of people who were supposed to be allies. Hamilton, according to those who were in the room, didn't shout. He didn't slam the table. Instead, he replied with a low, steady voice that carried the kind of intensity that makes people listen. "I didn't come here to play second fiddle," he said, eyes locked on Vasseur. "I'm an 8-time world champion, not a backup dancer." The phrase hung in the air like a storm cloud. Leclerc, sitting nearby with arms crossed, reportedly avoided eye contact. He didn't flinch. He didn't intervene. He remained still, watching but not engaging, letting the silence between them stretch wider. To many in the room, it was the confirmation of what had already been whispered in hushed tones. Ferrari was no longer a united front. It was a fractured entity, split between loyalty to its current golden boy and the growing disillusionment of a legend who had realized the promises made to him were beginning to unravel. The situation didn't cool off after Austria. In fact, what followed only deepened the fissure. According to a Ferrari insider who has been with the team for over a decade, a private meeting was hastily arranged between Hamilton and Vasseur at the team's headquarters in Maranello. No media. No advisors. Just the two of them in a soundproof room, away from the buzz of engineers and the buzz of cameras. What was supposed to be a reconciliation turned into something much colder. Vasseur, trying to reassert control, reportedly laid out the team's priorities in plain language. We need to focus the structure around Charles. He's younger, and he's our long-term investment. No hesitation. No sugarcoating. It was a declaration of direction that removed all ambiguity about where Hamilton stood. Lewis stood from his chair slowly. His expression wasn't angry, it was betrayed. He looked directly at Vasseur and responded in a voice described as calm but emotionally loaded. "You never told me I was just a placeholder," he said. "If that's the truth, I never should have joined." The meeting ended shortly after. No handshake. No agreement. Just the sound of a door closing behind Hamilton as he walked out of the room without looking back. But the real spark that turned underlying tension into open hostility came just a week later, at Silverstone. During the British Grand Prix weekend, on Hamilton's home soil no less, the facade of professionalism completely broke down. Away from the broadcast feed, in a private driver's briefing room behind the paddock, Hamilton and Leclerc clashed openly. It began with what was supposed to be a technical discussion, but things turned sour when Leclerc reportedly made a dismissive remark about recent strategy decisions, indirectly implying that the team's judgment had been correct, even if it compromised Hamilton's result. That thinly veiled jab landed hard. Hamilton, already on edge, turned directly to Leclerc and asked the question many within the team had been too afraid to voice aloud. "Did you influence that call during the race?" The room fell silent. Leclerc, with a smirk that would later become infamous within the inner circle, responded coolly, "The team does what's best for the team." That sentence might have passed unnoticed under different circumstances, but in that moment, it acted like a lit match tossed into dry hay. Hamilton's reaction was immediate and razor-sharp. He stood up slightly from his seat and fired back, "No, they do what's best for you. But don't ever mistake my silence for weakness." The intensity in his voice cut through the air. Other drivers reportedly looked down, uncomfortable. Team personnel sitting nearby turned their attention to their notes. No one wanted to intervene. No one dared to speak. That moment, according to a source close to the situation, marked the complete breakdown of the working relationship between the two drivers. From that point on, communication between them became nearly non-existent. They no longer shared briefings. They avoided each other in the paddock. Even casual interactions, eye contact, greetings, post-session comments, vanished. Mechanics started noticing that the garage was effectively divided in half. Two teams within one, operating in silence. For the first time in his career, Hamilton wasn't just fighting rivals on the track, he was battling invisibility within his own garage. What was supposed to be a legacy-defining chapter had turned into a series of closed doors and unanswered questions. His arrival at Ferrari had been celebrated globally, a historic move that paired the sport's most decorated driver with its most iconic team. But behind the marketing campaign and the glossy red livery, the reality was darker. He had walked into a structure already emotionally and politically aligned with someone else. The situation is unprecedented in modern Formula One. Hamilton, a master of resilience, has been in difficult team environments before. He's dealt with political tension, favoritism, and inner team battles at McLaren and Mercedes. But this was different. This was about being invited in with promises of equality and then slowly watching that illusion collapse. He was never meant to be the centerpiece. He was a transitional figure brought in to elevate the team's brand, not to compete for its future. What makes this saga so gripping is the contrast. The world sees two Ferrari drivers smiling for photos, giving interviews, and attending press events. What it doesn't see is the silence in the simulator room, the lack of communication during debriefs, the awkward tension in team strategy meetings, and the growing unease among the staff who now have to navigate a divided garage. And through it all, Hamilton hasn't walked away. He continues to race. He continues to fight on the track. But the fire in his eyes now burns differently. It's not fueled by ambition or victory. It's driven by something deeper: the need to reclaim his dignity, the desire to prove that he wasn't just a figurehead, and the refusal to let his final chapter be written by people who never truly wanted him to lead. What happens next is unknown. Some believe Hamilton may force an early exit. Others think he'll stay, finish the season, and let the results speak for themselves. But one thing is certain: the silence is over. The gloves are off. The emotions are raw. And Lewis Hamilton is no longer pretending that everything behind the red walls of Ferrari is fine. He's speaking with his voice. He's driving with his soul. And the world, whether Ferrari likes it or not, is paying attention. It was during that very instant, unseen by cameras, unrecorded by microphones, yet etched indelibly into the memories of those who stood within range, that something inside Lewis Hamilton shifted forever. A sensation that had been quietly simmering for months finally crystallized into certainty. For a long time, Hamilton had tried to ignore the signs, to suppress the creeping feeling that perhaps the fairy tale he had envisioned when he signed with Ferrari was never meant to be realized. But in that one unspoken moment of cold dismissal, something broke, not just in his relationship with the team, but in the trust he had placed in the entire Ferrari project. It wasn't rage that overtook him. It wasn't even sadness. It was something more dangerous: disillusionment. That wordless rejection, the accumulation of months of passive disrespect, preferential treatment toward his teammate, and the subtle erosion of the stature he had spent decades building, left a deep emotional bruise. And though he said nothing publicly, those closest to him saw the difference almost immediately. The spark in his eye had dimmed. The bounce in his step had flattened. He no longer moved through the paddock with that signature blend of grace and gravity. Instead, he walked as if burdened by invisible weight, the pressure of unrealized potential coupled with the sting of underappreciation. Ferrari, in its quest to recapture glory, had recruited the greatest racing talent of the modern era, a man with more poles, more wins, more records than any other driver of his generation. And yet, they had managed to make him feel peripheral. Instead of centering their philosophy around his wisdom, leadership, and depth of experience, they treated him as a supplemental piece, a secondary voice in a machine already focused elsewhere. Not once had they truly asked what he needed, what he envisioned, how he could bring the team forward. They nodded in meetings, applauded in press conferences, posted photos on social media. But behind closed doors, decisions were made without him. Strategies were altered without input. Doubts about his pace were whispered behind his back. The sense of exclusion gnawed at him. For a man who had once been at the heart of every Mercedes triumph, trusted, empowered, celebrated, this new reality felt surreal. And it wasn't just the leadership. Even some of the garage crew, whom he had tried to connect with, kept him at arm's length. It was as though the red suit he wore came with invisible walls, walls that separated him from the culture, the camaraderie, the trust he had grown accustomed to. What the fans saw on race weekends, his brave face, his poised interviews, the occasional smile on the podium, was only the surface. Beneath that, Hamilton was waging a quiet war within himself. A war between pride and purpose. Between staying the course and acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, this chapter was never his to write. The media had no idea. The reporters chasing rumors in the paddock never caught the truth beneath the tension. And even among Hamilton's inner circle, only a select few knew that by the time the European leg of the calendar began, Lewis was already planning his exit. The decision hadn't been made overnight. It had begun with small doubts, then grown through a series of painful interactions and dismissals, until one day, while sitting alone in the Ferrari motorhome after a disappointing strategy call in Canada, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in over a year. Toto Wolff answered almost immediately. At first, it was casual. A simple exchange between two men who had shared the highest of highs and survived the lowest of lows. They spoke about life, the season, how strange it felt not to see each other at briefings or in debriefs. But underneath the surface, something more urgent was beginning to stir. Hamilton didn't ask for anything that day. He didn't mention Ferrari. But Toto knew. He always knew. The tone in Lewis's voice, the frustration hidden behind the politeness, was unmistakable. It was the sound of a man who no longer felt seen. Weeks passed. Races came and went. The team dynamic at Ferrari continued to fracture. Leclerc grew bolder in strategy meetings, often overruling calls. Vasseur doubled down on backing the Monégasque driver. And Hamilton? He slowly stopped fighting. Not out of defeat, but out of clarity. The writing was on the wall, and he no longer needed to prove anything. Then came Hungary. It had been a difficult weekend, both emotionally and competitively. And after the race, Hamilton didn't return to Monaco, or Maranello, or even London. Instead, he took a private flight to Vienna, traveling quietly, with no entourage, no press, no fanfare. There, in an inconspicuous building just outside Mercedes' European headquarters, he met face-to-face with a man who had believed in him when others hadn't, who had built a dynasty around his brilliance, who had always known exactly how to get the best from him. Toto Wolff. The meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. No agents. No lawyers. No PR representatives. Just two men in a room, talking openly, honestly, the way only people with unshakable history can. Hamilton didn't sugarcoat anything. He didn't come looking for sympathy. His voice was clear, his words deliberate. "Toto, I can't keep doing this," he told him. "They don't value me. They see me as a fading force, not as someone who still has fire left. I've given everything, and all I get back is distance." Wolff didn't interrupt. He let the silence stretch after Lewis finished speaking, then leaned forward, locking eyes with the man who had delivered him championships, who had redefined what was possible in Formula One. And then, in that understated Austrian drawl, he spoke the words Hamilton hadn't realized he'd been desperate to hear. "Then come back," he said quietly, but firmly. "Let's finish what we started. On your terms. The final chapter, written your way." Hamilton didn't respond immediately. He just looked at Toto, expression unreadable, emotion flickering behind his eyes. In that moment, the weight of everything, the broken promises, the fading dream, the suffocating months of alienation, began to lift. Not because the pain was gone, but because there was now a way out. A path forward. A door, cracked open by the one man who had always understood that Lewis wasn't just a driver, he was a force. A movement. A living legacy. The two men talked late into the evening, discussing possibilities, scenarios, contingencies. Nothing was finalized that night. No contracts were signed. But something far more important was exchanged: belief. And that belief would soon spark a sequence of events no one saw coming. Once Hamilton and Wolff stepped out of that motorhome on that silent, emotionally charged evening, the paddock might have returned to its normal rhythm, but beneath the surface, the wheels of something far more profound had begun to turn. Not publicly. Not with fanfare. But quietly, intentionally, and with a sense of urgency that could only be born from something deeply personal. That private conversation between them didn't end with tears, it ended with understanding. And in that shared understanding, something was ignited, a vision neither of them had dared articulate in months, maybe even years. From that moment onward, negotiations didn't follow the usual protocol of contract extensions and performance clauses. This wasn't just about a racing seat. This was about restoring something sacred: identity, respect, legacy, and above all, meaning. It was about giving Lewis Hamilton not just a place on the grid, but a role that aligned with who he was, what he had built, and where he intended to go. Mercedes, still recovering from seasons filled with disappointment, inconsistency, and a loss of internal cohesion, recognized what few others did. They didn't just need a driver, they needed a compass. And for Toto Wolff, Hamilton was that compass. The meetings were held in complete secrecy. No leaks. No social media whispers. Not a single rumor crept out into the ever-hungry F1 media landscape. Everything was orchestrated behind thick walls and encrypted messages, far from the spotlight. Only a tight circle of individuals within the upper echelons of Mercedes-Benz and AMG Petronas knew that the most crucial rebuilding operation in recent memory was underway. And it wasn't about chassis upgrades or wind tunnel hours. It was about heart. Hamilton, for his part, didn't come to the table as a desperate man seeking refuge. He entered the room with clarity and purpose. He was measured, grounded, but there was a non-negotiable firmness in his voice when he laid down his singular condition. He wasn't asking for special treatment. He didn't want power plays or politics. He wanted something simpler, yet infinitely more profound: parity. No internal agendas. No strategic favoritism. No whisper campaigns to favor a younger teammate. No subtle undermining of his experience or character in meetings. Just authenticity. Just dignity. His message was crystal clear: if I return as an equal, no illusions, no shadows. I will not spend my final years in Formula One surviving a narrative. I want to live the reality I helped build. Wolff didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for clarification. He didn't request time to consult stakeholders or sponsors. He agreed, instantly. Not because it was convenient, but because it was right. Because deep down, he knew that Mercedes owed it not just to Hamilton, but to the very legacy they built together. What they had achieved wasn't transactional, it was transformative. The decision wasn't just business. It was a reckoning, a reunion, a resurrection. The final terms were drafted quickly. Over the span of just a few days, lawyers refined language, advisors signed off on logistics, and a handful of late-night calls between Lewis and Wolff smoothed over the final details. There were no negotiations over branding or social media control. The focus wasn't on image, it was on substance. Hamilton didn't want a legacy defined by post-career documentaries or merchandise. He wanted one rooted in respect, sealed on track, and acknowledged inside the garage. Still, despite the speed of the agreement, both parties agreed on one crucial point: the world wouldn't hear about it until Lewis said it was time. No press releases. No strategic leaks to build anticipation. No early tips to friendly journalists. The announcement wouldn't come from Mercedes. It wouldn't be choreographed by marketing experts. It would come from him, and only when he was ready to speak in his own voice, with his own truth. That moment arrived today, August 8th, chosen by Hamilton himself with a sense of poetic precision. Exactly 1 week after he had posted a cryptic Instagram story that had sent millions of fans into a frenzy of speculation. The teaser had been subtle, a short clip of him walking alone under the setting sun, accompanied by a caption that simply read, "Soon." No colors. No logos. Just presence. And then, without warning, without build-up, he posted the message. The image was black and white. No filter. Just rawness. His face, captured in side profile, serious but serene. And beneath it, his words, deliberate, direct, and layered with both gratitude and defiance. To Mercedes, thank you for remembering who I am, even when others tried to make me forget. There was no ambiguity. That sentence alone spoke volumes. Volumes of betrayal, of emotional erasure, of the quiet alienation he endured in red. It wasn't merely a thank you. It was a subtle reclamation of identity, delivered with poetic fire. A reminder that loyalty isn't just about contracts or branding deals. It's about being seen in your entirety, especially when the world starts reducing you to numbers and expectations. Then came the line for the fans, those who had stayed. Not just during wins, but through humiliation, confusion, and silence. To the ones who never stopped believing, I never stopped feeling it. Even when I couldn't say it, I knew you were there. It was a sentence soaked in emotional honesty. A quiet nod to the army of supporters who kept defending him when narratives shifted, when headlines grew colder, and when entire nations turned their attention elsewhere. But it was the final portion of the message that delivered the sharpest cut. A line aimed directly, unmistakably, at his former team. Red was never the problem. It was the cold behind the red. The silence. The dismissals. The indifference. Respect can't be painted on a car. It has to live in the team. With those words, Hamilton did more than sever a relationship. He exposed the rot beneath the surface. He called out the culture, not the machinery, not the fans, not the heritage, but the void of warmth that had haunted his time in Maranello. He didn't name names. He didn't have to. The message was surgical, devastating in its precision. And yet, it wasn't bitter. It was mournful. Like someone who had finally accepted that the love they hoped to find in a place had never really been there at all. What followed was an emotional storm online. Millions of shares. Tens of thousands of comments. Fellow drivers, past legends, musicians, celebrities, and activists all weighed in. The motorsport world had been sent into emotional overdrive, not just because Lewis was returning, but because he had finally spoken. Not in sanitized PR statements. Not in corporate-approved press conferences. But in his own language, unfiltered, passionate, vulnerable, and free. This wasn't just a comeback. It was a declaration. And while the world begins to digest the implications, one thing has already become clear: Hamilton's story is no longer about what he's chasing. It's about what he's reclaiming. Because sometimes, the most powerful move isn't leaving. It's returning, with nothing left to prove, but everything left to say. He concluded his emotionally charged post with a single image, one that conveyed more than 1,000 words ever could. It was a photograph of his very first Mercedes race suit, aged yet pristine, carefully hung inside a softly illuminated, shadow-drenched garage. The lighting was subdued, the mood almost reverent, as if history itself was exhaling in that quiet moment. The caption beneath it was striking in its simplicity and weight: "Coming home. 2026. Let's finish this right." There was no elaborate explanation, no dramatic embellishment, no lengthy rationale. Just 5 words that broke the internet in an instant. Within mere minutes of the post going live, social platforms collapsed into a collective frenzy. Fans flooded timelines with memories of Hamilton's greatest triumphs in silver. News outlets scrambled to verify what many initially believed was an elaborate rumor or even an elaborate stunt, and racing forums lit up with posts that climbed into the thousands within the hour. It wasn't just an announcement, it was a cultural explosion. The motorsport world, already shaken by his abrupt exit from Ferrari, now found itself caught in a storm of disbelief and anticipation. Mercedes responded with minimalism, but that only amplified the impact. A single graphic. A familiar number 44, emblazoned in white over a brushed steel background. The official account posted, "He's back." That's all it took. No fanfare. No videos. No corporate grandstanding. Just a 3-word confirmation that reverberated across every major publication and platform. The image was enough to reignite the soul of the Mercedes fanbase. Suddenly, all the questions that had haunted recent seasons, about identity, direction, and future, seemed to find a new center of gravity. There was, notably, no response from Maranello. At least not immediately. While fans demanded accountability, while commentators speculated endlessly, Ferrari remained silent. No press release. No thank you. No parting words. The lack of acknowledgement was interpreted by many as a final misstep, a failure to recognize the magnitude of what they had just lost. Others saw it as a stubborn refusal to legitimize the narrative that Hamilton had escaped their institution with his integrity intact. Either way, the silence spoke louder than any official comment could have. But beyond the theatrics of team switches and social media reveals lies something much deeper, far more resonant. Hamilton's return to Mercedes represents more than a mere reshuffling of contracts or a strategic move on the chessboard of Formula One. It is a profound expression of identity reclamation. It is the act of a man taking control of his own narrative, refusing to let politics, pressure, or performance insecurities define the closing chapters of his story. It is not about revenge. It is not about redemption. It is about coming full circle with clarity, self-respect, and unflinching determination. This move isn't just a career pivot. It's a manifesto. After a turbulent tenure at Ferrari, one plagued by cultural misalignments, a lack of creative freedom, and reportedly increasing tensions over values and voice, Hamilton's decision to return to Brackley is a message to every young athlete, every aspiring leader, and every individual who has ever been asked to compromise their authenticity for the sake of tradition. He is stating unequivocally that real leadership means choosing peace over prestige, alignment over applause. Inside the Mercedes factory, sources have already confirmed that the announcement has breathed new life into a team that had been visibly grappling with internal recalibration. Engineers reportedly erupted in cheers when Toto relayed the news to senior staff. Mechanics exchanged hugs. Senior designers, many of whom worked with Hamilton during his golden years, were seen revisiting old data with a sense of renewed urgency. Even those new to the team, young recruits who had never worked with Lewis before, felt the gravity of what was about to unfold. This wasn't just a personnel move. It was a spiritual reset. Behind the scenes, plans are already being drawn. Not just for car development or simulation preparation, but for something broader, a cultural renaissance. Mercedes knows that Hamilton brings more than racecraft and technical input. He brings a worldview, a voice, a standard. His presence sharpens the focus of everyone around him, not because of intimidation, but because of inspiration. He's the type of figure who elevates expectations simply by walking into the room. And that's exactly what this team needs as it prepares for the seismic regulatory changes of 2026. From a commercial perspective, the announcement has already triggered shockwaves. Sponsors are lining up. Merchandise is flying off shelves. Ticket prices for 2026 races are spiking in anticipation. Media partners are restructuring content calendars to accommodate what is now guaranteed to be the most followed sporting comeback in recent memory. Hamilton's return isn't just symbolic, it's a business renaissance. It's reawakening the casual viewer, rekindling the loyalty of longtime supporters, and drawing in an entirely new generation of fans who may have felt disillusioned or disconnected in recent seasons. On a more personal level, this move reconnects Hamilton with the people who always understood him best. The engineers who trusted his instincts without question. The strategists who knew how to decode his feedback in real time. The leadership team that never asked him to shrink to fit a mold. Returning to Mercedes is not about reliving the past. It's about building a new future with the lessons of both triumph and turmoil fully integrated. It's about choosing an environment that respects the full scope of his identity, as an athlete, an activist, and human being. The ripple effect across the paddock is already profound. Drivers are re-evaluating their futures. Team principals are reassessing their rosters. Engineers are second-guessing their projections. Hamilton's decision has reset the emotional and strategic landscape of the entire sport. Because when someone of his magnitude makes such a decisive high-stakes move, it forces everyone else to examine where they stand, not just professionally but morally. It reignites debates about loyalty, purpose, and the true cost of legacy. And as the dust continues to swirl around Ferrari, many are left wondering what might have been. What would the sport have looked like had the partnership worked? Had Ferrari given him space to lead rather than expecting him to conform? Had they seen not just the driver, but the man? But those questions, however haunting, are now irrelevant. Because Hamilton has chosen forward. He has chosen clarity. He has chosen home. The energy building toward the 2026 season is unlike anything seen in the hybrid era. There's electricity in the air, a palpable sense of inevitability. This isn't a return for nostalgia's sake. It's a return to purpose. Hamilton's eyes are not on trophies, they're on truth. His mission is no longer about just crossing the finish line first. It's about ensuring that when he does step away, whenever that may be, he leaves on his own terms, with his voice, his values, and his vision unbroken. For Mercedes, it's not just the comeback of a champion, it's the restoration of a heartbeat. And for Hamilton, it's not about writing a final chapter. It's about authoring a new volume, one that redefines what it means to race, to lead, and to rise. And as the countdown to 2026 begins, one thing is now beyond dispute: Lewis Hamilton isn't finished. He's just getting started, again.